The 12 steps are incredible. They're great. They're especially helpful not only for staying sober, but breaking, I think, a lot of unhealthy habits, like I say in my book, for dealing with unhealthy habits, but not when it comes to really dysfunctional patterns that you need more help to be able to process through those. And the danger is that there are people who are sponsoring in 12-step programs who are sort of acting as if therapists, right? Sort of like armchair therapists that are not trained to do so. And that can be dangerous for people.
Welcome to a Broaderlands podcast. The opinions expressed on Broaderlands podcast are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlands podcast. KJ, welcome to Broaderlands podcast. What an honor to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. And like we were chatting right before we press record, I go, we better start pressing record because I really relate to you and I really appreciate you. I've been sober around similar time. You got a couple years or a year more than me. I got sober in 2009 and I went through my stuff. I love the fellowship of the 12-step communities. But I've also been hurt by the 12-step communities. And when I was hurt, I found your page somewhere along the line. And I felt like, you know, you would think outside the box, yet you still appreciated the traditional lenses at the same time, but you were still getting some negative feedback as well. So I didn't feel alone. So thank
Yeah.
you for your work.
You're welcome. Absolutely. Had similar experiences and definitely am grateful for my time in AA and absolutely grateful for the 12 steps and how they transformed my life. But I too had some very negative, what I would even describe as traumatic experiences participating in the program. But it's very hard to talk about because I do have such a sense of gratitude for the impact that it's had on my life. But as we'll probably talk more about, I grew out of it, I think, in a sense, right? I started to evolve and change, and it became very limited to me in terms of the more spiritual growth that I was seeking. So when I started to talk about things that didn't fall quite in alignment with what people believe, and there's, as you know, there are people that are very, I guess the word is like radical in their belief of you have to believe this way or you're wrong type of a belief system. And I think whenever we're closed-minded like that, where it comes out and comes across as, well, I believe this is the way it is, so you have to believe exactly what I believe. And I'm much more open and inclusive and open to people having different spiritual beliefs. So it started to become a little bit suffocating for me.
I appreciate that because I had the same experience. And I think this is important to talk about because some people, you know, don't know how to talk about it. We're told not to talk about it. I would have people tell me, don't get too spiritual for AA. People talking behind my back, no longer calling me anymore. And that was hurtful. It's called religious trauma in many ways. You know, and I was labeled a heretic. And, you know, the word heretic itself in Greek means to think your own choice. So when we have our own opinions, you know, sometimes you hear in the fellowship, opinions are like a-holes. You know, everyone has one, but I always say, don't forget we start off with the doctor's opinion. But, an orthodox means to think straight, a certain way told by an authority or sometimes the group collective, you know, and so I got shunned. But I started to look at modern science and wanting to know more because I was suffering at 6-7 years of sobriety, realizing that I wasn't really working on my trauma that I bypassed through the 12 steps.
Right. And I think that that's a very important point, Boo Boo, because there are people that are using the 12 steps as a therapeutic process. And even though it is therapeutic to an extent, it's not something that is meant to work through your childhood trauma, and it's not meant to address some other really significant mental health issues that a lot of people in recovery are struggling with. And so I sought outside help. I was doing in conjunction with my 12-step program, I had a therapist that I was working with on a regular basis. And one of the difficulties that I started to experience over time was when I myself became a therapist, because I became a therapist at 2 years sober.
Mm.
And over time, it started to become more and more difficult to keep those roles separate. I would have women come to me and say, "Oh, you would be the perfect sponsor for me. I want you to sponsor me because I want to work on my childhood trauma." And I'm like, "I'm not, wait, I'm taking you through the steps. Like, you need a separate therapy." And they started to look at me as providing all of that. And so I think that's an important aspect to really be aware of, is that the 12 steps are incredible. They're great. They're especially helpful not only for staying sober, but breaking, I think, a lot of unhealthy habits, like I say in my book, for dealing with unhealthy habits, but not when it comes to really dysfunctional patterns that you need more help to be able to process through those. And the danger is that there are people who are sponsoring in 12-step programs who are sort of acting as if therapists, right? Sort of like armchair therapists that are not trained to do so. And that can be dangerous for people.
You're right. I'm actually writing a section in my book called Conscious Sponsorship. And that's so important because sponsors take on all these different roles that they're
Hmm.
not capable of fulfilling,
Right.
and then the ego kicks in and
The
that could cause a
ego.
lot of damage.
Hmm.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
ego is a big culprit for sure.
Yeah. The word trauma is a bad word sometimes in the 12-step community, mainly to a lot of old timers. I've got a lot of negative feedback to some of the old timers, not everyone, but I always say, well, the word resentment means to refill. What do you think we're refilling? And the big book
Hmm.
says, where were we hurt or threatened? And the word
Hmm.
trauma means wound. So we're
Hmm.
refilling these wounds. So it's important to acknowledge them at a deeper level instead of just thinking it's just anger, you know?
Right. Well, and to some people too, depending upon your upbringing and how you were conditioned, what you were conditioned to believe about trauma and what is trauma, there are
Yeah.
so many people that I've met who I've worked with clinically who have, when I've asked them about trauma, they'll say to me, "Oh, I've not experienced any trauma." And then I ask them, "Were you ever bullied in middle school?" And then they said, "Oh, yeah, I was bullied in middle school." And I'm like, well, trauma is a spectrum, right? So,
Hmm.
trauma, in my opinion, is anything, any experience that we have that has a lot of negative emotion that's attached to it. So, that could be being bullied in middle school. That could be going through a divorce for a lot of people, most people, is a trauma. Things like that, that maybe some people having an addiction, experiencing an addiction is a traumatic experience.
Hmm.
That's a trauma. So I think that we often misunderstand trauma. And then also because of that, people maybe minimize their trauma and don't think that they need to get maybe some extra help for that trauma, and understand that it's interfering in their life in ways that maybe they're not able to see unless they seek some more help outside of the 12 steps and whatever program they're participating in.
You're right. It's just like the Four Noble Truths. If you look at the first one, suffering is a part of the human experience. It's the fundamental piece of the human experience. That's we can change that word to trauma. It's a
Right.
part of the human experience, and what's
Hmm.
traumatizing for you may not be traumatizing for
Correct.
me, and what's
Hmm.
traumatizing for me is not may not be traumatizing for you.
Right.
And I started to realize this stuff and started to really, you hear in the rooms, I only know how to sponsor the way I was taught, which but tells me that they don't do step 11, praying only for
Mhm.
the, have that higher consciousness to
Right.
help each individual, not in a black and white sense of
Hmm.
sponsorship, but in a more unique and authentic way of helping this person because
Right.
everyone's different.
Everyone is different.
Yeah.
True.
How would you define addiction?
Oh, how would define addiction? I think that addiction is any behavior that we engage in where there are consequences that we're experiencing as a result of that behavior, but we still then engage in the behavior. And that can be anything from a relationship that is unhealthy and causing us pain, yet we still go back and continue to engage in that relationship, to food that we know that eating that, whether it's the donut or the pizza or the whatever it is, there are certain things that I know if I were to eat them, they would make me sick. So I stay away from those. But if I were to continue, and a lot of us do this, is we know things are bad for us, but we continue to engage in eating them even though they create suffering. So again, addiction is also on a spectrum. You can be, which is why I prefer the terminology, especially when it comes to drinking and drug use, of substance use disorder, because it is clearer in rather than addiction, because I experienced a substance use disorder, and my addiction, even though I will absolutely 100% tell you that I was psychologically addicted to drinking, I would not consider myself physically addicted to drinking because I was a binge drinker. Some of the hardest people to treat are binge drinkers because we can stop for a period of time, sometimes significant periods of time. But the key characteristic is the over drinking when you do drink, that more often than not, drinking to excess rather than, drinking moderately. So I think anything that we continue to do despite consequences, to me, is addictive behavior.
Mm,
And
I
that can
love
be
that.
thinking, boo boo. That could be
Yeah.
thinking. Do you know how many people think addictively? Think, just think about worst case scenarios and think negatively constantly, and it's hurting them and it's creating depression and a harmful cycle of behavior, but yet they're addicted to the negative mindset. And that's usually because we grow up in environments where we become conditioned to think in certain ways. So even our thinking, and people will tell you it wasn't a drinking problem, it was a thinking problem, right? It wasn't the substance, it was the thinking. And that's true. But I've met plenty of people who don't have drinking or drug problems, but still have thinking problems.
So true. And you brought that up in one of your books, Addictive Thinking. You talk about, and I
Hmm.
appreciate that. And sometimes the word addict is a bad word in AA. And
Hmm.
then I'm quick to tell the person that makes a comment because someone said they're an addict. I The big book says alcohol became my master,
Hmm.
and the word addict, the root meaning has something to do with being a slave. Alcohol
Right.
became my master.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah,
Well,
yeah,
can I comment on that?
sure.
Because I have some pretty strong opinions about that. I believe that anything that we state where we use the word a or an before it, you are a, you are an, makes it internalized, which attaches shame to it. So we're
Yeah.
basically labeling someone as it. So we're not saying, that's why I like substance use disorder so much.
Mm,
You have a substance use disorder. You are experiencing an addiction. When we
yes.
say you are a, or you are an, that personalizes it. It's like the person is the problem instead of the behavior being the problem, which feeds into shame. And so there was a time when I first got sober where I needed to tell myself over and over again, and I even introduced myself in meetings as I am an alcoholic and I always will be, because I had to ingrain that into myself because of my binge drinking. It was very easy for me, and it would happen very quickly, that I would convince myself, you know what, I'm fine. I don't have a problem. I'm not like these other people, blah, 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 blah. But there came a time in my recovery where that no longer applied.
Yep.
And I remember one of my sponsors saying to me, KJ, why do you say that? Because I would introduce myself that way at meetings. And I said, because I do it to remind myself. And I think I was a year and a half sober. And she said, do you still need to? She thought it was more about my ego. You need to be different. You're trying to,
Yeah.
you're introducing yourself different than everyone else. And, there was probably some truth in that. And she asked me, she said, if I ask you not to introduce yourself that way, but just introduce yourself as, I'm an alcoholic. And, and so I did. I did what she said. and, and then I started to evolve and grow and learn about shame. It wasn't until I got sober in 2008. Brene Brown's TED Talk on shame, her first TED Talk, I believe, was in 2010. I just started working in treatment then, and I was working with families, and a family member came up to me and told me about Brene Brown's TED Talk, and he said, you have to watch this. I watched that TED Talk, and it changed so much for me in terms of recognizing how dangerous shame is and the role that shame plays in addiction, and especially in addiction recovery. And that's when I stopped with the A and the N and the labeling language and started to shift my language.
I love that. That's exactly what I did. And I got shamed. I'm trying to be different, but I realized how unhealthy that was until I found Bruce Limpton, Dispenza, and many other doctors saying that, talking about this stuff. I started to realize like I was right. I followed my intuition, even though people were talking crap about me because I'm trying to be different. I realize that's unhealthy for me because the mind and body doesn't know the difference. And then
Mhm.
repeated conscious thoughts become subconscious thinking and feeling. And I wonder by that shaming, constant shaming, can we unconsciously create relapse through in that negative vibration? Because
Absolutely. Hmm.
if you look at the map of consciousness, David
Hmm.
Hawkins
Yeah.
puts up that
Yeah.
many people in AA love.
Hmm.
It's on a very low level of consciousness. Now, it's important when you're brand new to say, "Hey, that's me," but that's when you're working with the sponsor, going through the big book.
Hmm.
But to have that as a custom, every
Right.
meeting saying I'm an alcoholic, that's unhealthy for me.
Right. And 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 I want to point out that on the map of consciousness, shame is the lowest level. It's on the very bottom. So that just goes to show how dangerous shame is. And I do believe, even though my sponsor at the time told me that she felt it was an ego issue, there's a part of me now, as I've evolved and changed, and I look back on the experiences that I had in AA, and many positive,
Yeah,
but some negative. Uh, a part of me today now views that differently. I view it as, well, but I was trying to be unique and different and have my own, sort of like create my own path, even though now I would agree that that's unhealthy and I wouldn't recommend that to people or want to do that
yeah.
today. It was this way of me trying to have my own path, rather than you have to fall into this cookie cutter, you have to do it this way, and if you go out of alignment with the way that we tell you to do it, then you're somehow wrong or bad.
Mm.
And I don't agree with that. So I think you have to meet people where they are, and it did work for me. I think that it was positive for me overall. but with, like you said, with other, breaking, when I broke away from I say broke away, I mean, even the language of breaking away, when I stopped, let's just say what it was, when I stopped going to meetings and I told people that I was taking a different path, people dropped like flies.
Yeah.
Like they were gone. It was, if you're not with us, then you're not with us. Then you're, you know, which isn't a normal relationship that you have with people, right? Because you choose to to participate in something. I think at that time, COVID had just started, COVID had just happened. And at the time, I stopped going meetings right before COVID happened. And I was considering doing Celebrate Recovery because I had gone from this like non-religious person to exploring, well, let me explore religion. Let me see if this is something that may fit for me, may feel right for me now that I've grown spiritually. And even that was, you're leaving? Okay, goodbye. We're not like talking to you again. Like it was so strange.
That's exactly what happened to me. And it was very hurtful. It really
Mhm.
was, especially someone that has abandonment issues, like
Right.
myself,
Right.
and Bill Wilson as well. He got dual abandonment issues. But,
Mhm.
I, yeah, it was really hard because, like, I remember thinking, like, well, what's the difference? I mean, the people I stopped talking to once I stopped drinking, my old friends, they stopped talking to me because I don't party anymore. And
Right.
now the people in the fellowship are no longer talking to me because I'm not going to meetings or I think differently.
Mhm.
That was pretty hurtful. Like, is that all we have as a friendship?
Right.
And that
Right.
was pretty hurtful to go through. But I had to evolve and go through that
Yeah.
experience,
I,
and I'm
I
grateful
think,
for it.
yeah, I think for me, um, the most hurtful part was the it's only a matter of time and you're going to
Yeah.
drink again comments. And that was at the time infuriating to me. I was like, so you're telling me that if I don't go to meetings, I'm doomed to drink again. And that really bothered me because I thought, I am working my 12 step, I am giving back, I am you know, practicing 10, 11, 12. I have a husband who is also sober and we have our own meeting together,
Yeah.
we so it to tell people that I think is really hurtful. To say to people, you're going to relapse if you don't go to meeting. I mean, to tell somebody that at the very beginning is one thing. I do
Yeah.
believe that the fellowship, and I don't mean AA or NA or a 12-step program. I just mean a person struggling with, an extreme substance use disorder that's struggling to function, if you don't embrace and become a part of a group that can support you, generally when you're at that later stage, it's very difficult to do it yourself. Like you can't do it yourself. You need to be surrounded by people who can support you, who are on the same path. And I emphasize this in all of my literature, is that it's not, to me, it doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter what group you join for help. Find people who are your tribe, the people that you resonate with and that align with your belief system, and immerse yourself into it, because you need other people in order to support you and give you the strength. If you know anything like you do about the map of consciousness, you know that you need strength because you're living in that swamp that's, low on the map of consciousness. You need other people to help pull you out and pull you up until you're able to gain that strength yourself. So for people at, 10, I may have even been 12 years sober at that time, to say, it's only a matter of time, you're going to drink again,
Yeah,
was
that's crazy.
not, yeah, what was crazy. Yes.
Well, I call that survival mode sobriety. When people are in survival mode sobriety, it's important to do some work on yourself, have commitments, go to meetings, have a sponsor, get guidance, and,
Mm,
kind of act your way into better thinking. Or in science, neuroscience
right,
will say neurons that fire together wire together, neurons that
right,
no longer fire together no longer wire together.
right.
So I need to go through that and work on myself. Some people may need outside help. I hope the 12-step community can help embrace that a little bit more.
Hmm.
To outside help is probably vital for some people. For me, I went back through the steps on my own, and I
Hmm.
relooked at my childhood, and I really had more awareness, and I started to integrate that stuff on my own.
Hmm.
And it started to change me more and have a deeper understanding of, like, my parents, their upbringing, and
Hmm.
other people as well. When I start to understand myself better, I can understand others better as well and see
Right,
where they're suffering. So that really helped me. But everyone's different. Just because what helped me may not help other people, and
right.
vice versa. There's no black
Hmm.
and white recovery either. You
Hmm.
know,
Absolutely. And there are people who have been able to stay sober through the guidance and help of a therapist. I think
yeah,
all you really need is one person who is on your side and supporting you and encouraging you in a way that that works for you. And like you said, what works for you may not work for me and vice versa. It's just the trying to do it on your own. I think people can. You were doing it on your own after you had
yeah,
already, been through the steps, and also you had already gained a certain amount of insight as well. And also, I think too, one of the important things to realize is that it's through the doing, right? You can read all the self-help literature mm, that's out there, but until you start practicing changed
yeah.
behavior, changed choices, that was a huge turning point for me in my recovery. Is I think I don't even know how how long I had been sober. I don't know if it was 6 months or 18 months, but it was relatively early on. I think it must have been 6 months where I started to realize that and there's this, I heard in a meeting, if you want something that you've never had, you're going to need to be willing to
Mm.
do something you've never done. And that's the kind of the flip side of the, if you keep doing the same thing over again, expecting different results, that's the definition of insanity. That didn't work for me, but this idea of, KJ, you need to make different choices. You need to do things differently. And that's where it started, with this concept of, I need to make different choices. I need to start practicing these new and different behaviors. But until I know what those new and different behaviors are, I can't start until I have the
Yeah.
awareness, right? I need to have the self awareness first, right? And then I can take that information and apply it and start to create these new neural pathways, these new
Man,
healthier connections and habits.
I love that. In neuroscience, they call that metacognition, the power of awareness by observing. And that's what the beautiful thing about step 10 for me. I'd
Mhm.
love for you to talk about the 12 steps a little bit, if you don't mind. Like, what made you write the universal 12-step workbook?
I wrote the Universal 12-step workbook because I've believed for so long, and I've been thinking about this for a long time before I even started writing it, that I believe that the 12 steps should be taught in school.
Mm.
And that if they were not so re- religiously viewed, right? If they weren't viewed because of where they stemmed from, right? They
Yeah.
stemmed from religion, right? That's where it came. And people will, tell you till their dying day that they don't want to have anything to do with the 12 steps because they're religious based. And the truth of the matter is that if you are open-minded enough to look at them from the perspective of, and this is just truth, there are 12-step programs out there for just about anything that you can think of. And there are atheists 12-step groups. And so what they have done is they modify the steps based upon their belief system. And so there must be something to these 12 steps if they're being modified, and you'll find literature out there on the Buddhist way through the 12 steps. There's a book. So I thought, why not take some different perspectives, create a workbook that allows people to choose? And I don't mean that you necessarily even have to choose one way of looking at things, whether that's, spiritual, or whether that's through empowerment or psychological well-being. These are some different examples of the way that I have defined the steps and worded, not defined them per se, but worded them from a lens of, which I love, broader lens podcast. I love that because it's really about the lens through which we're viewing the world. And so you can choose one lens and say, okay, well, I'm going to view the steps. This is the way I view the universe, and the way that I view these steps is through this particular lens, and I'm just going to go through the steps based upon this choice. But I think that for me, when I was creating the book, I started to realize that I could almost see myself as, this step, I'm going to choose psychological well-being for step 1. But you know what? For step 2, the empowerment focused sort of definition works better for me for that step. And just sort of as I'm going through it, and that the bottom line is that leaves it open to the 12 steps being able to be accessible to anyone and everyone, so that someone in high school could open this book, and it's really just about addressing an unhealthy habit. If you're engaged in any type of unhealthy habit and you want to change as a result, that it's causing you some sort of pain in your life, then being able to read these steps and also approach these exercises from whatever viewpoint you choose, it makes it possible. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And we've been on the same page throughout our journey, I feel like, because I started to realize this in the 12-step community when I was, going through the steps and having time under my belt and continuing to grow. I realized that people get caught in the wording. And
Right.
it's not about, you need to get past the wording in some way, help these
Mm-hmm.
individuals get past the wording and really touch and
Mm-hmm.
reactivate the principle within our heart. It's already
Right.
written within us.
Right.
Um, and you said something that the steps live in you now,
Mm-hmm.
at the very end of your book. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that because they're within us and we just help activate that going through the
Right.
steps. Whether someone believes in God or not, modern
Mm-hmm.
science, I'm putting a mystical aspect to it, traditional like you did. I really love how you did that because that's what I started to do on my own and help them get past the wording. Like step 2, for an example,
Mm-hmm.
came to believe, in a power greater than yourself that can restore you to sanity. I always like to say the word sanity means healthy. And when you put an IN in front of it, it means not healthy. Now let's
Mm-hmm.
look at what's not healthy in you that's
Right.
causing suffering for yourself and
Mm-hmm.
others and distorting your perception. Um, so that I kind of look at it like that, or came to believe in a new way of living that can restore you
Right.
to sanity.
Exactly.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just trying to help people get past the wording to really activate that principle within
Mm-hmm.
them.
And there are people who are suffering today because they mm, and I have people that I know who are suffering today because they view the 12-step program as a religious program because of the word God, and that keeps them from engaging in it. And so if just to be able to read something where they can tap into something that resonates with them more so than the word God, I think is the beginning of people being able to integrate that in a way that works for them, right? And for me, I have found that it's definitely the word God that trips people up the most based upon, what they've been taught or what they've learned or what they've experienced relative to God. And so when I was sponsoring, I found this as to be like a big, big struggle for a lot of people. And I tried to help people by explaining, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to articulate this correctly. So hopefully you'll get what I mean. But I would say to people, if we went to Indonesia, right, and you were speaking the language there are probably things in their language or any other place where there's a different language where a word in their language means something terrible that means something good in our language, right? Like, so so if you just think of this word God as just a word, like it's a word. And so how can you define it that is meaningful for you in your own language, right? That makes it so that it can integrate with who you are and how you view the world.
Yeah.
So it's true that there are these, and I can't give you an example right here, right now, but a word in another language where in our language it means something good, and in that person's language it means something bad. So it's all about how you define the word. How are you defining the word?
I love that. Would you mind walking us through briefly through the 12 steps? Um, I mean, you don't have to like get into depth with them, but if you want to just for people that never even heard of the 12 steps and what they're about in each.
Well, I can do that I can give you an example because I have my book right
Sure.
here, the Universal 12-Step Workbook. So I can tell you that I give 5 different ways in my book to view each step, right? So, for example, the first step is we admitted we were powerless over, and of course, in Alcoholics Anonymous, that would be alcohol. And in the book, I put identified struggle because there are 12-step programs, like I said before, for so many different struggles. So I put, we admitted we were powerless over identified struggle, in quotes, and that our lives had become unmanageable. And this is really, to me, this is really all about honesty. And I need to become, for me, I need to become honest with me that this was a behavior, this was something this was a compulsion for me that was causing me pain and causing me problems in my life. But from a universal spiritual perspective, for example, it would be I acknowledge that my struggle has become greater than my ability to manage it without assistance. I need help with this particular issue. And secular would be I recognize that I can no longer control this issue on my own and that it's negatively impacting my life, which is somewhat similar to the universal spiritual. But the difference between secular and universal spiritual is secular is non-spiritual, like nothing, you know? So psychological wellness says I have become aware of how my current patterns of behavior are creating distress and dysfunction. So this is from the lens of psychological wellness and well-being. And the empowerment focused is I am taking an honest look at my life and I acknowledge that change is needed to regain balance and well-being. So that's just an example of the different views. I'm not
Yeah.
sure how you want me to take you through the steps in terms of what, in what way.
Step one was great enough because what you did in step one was give us different angles to look at.
Or
What I like about how you broke down step one and the rest of the 12 steps is how you, like I was saying earlier, and this is why I feel like we're on the same page in many ways because you give different ways to look at the steps from a broader lens, kind of what I'm writing and doing right now. And it's really helping people touch the principle that's already within their heart and activate that, whether they don't believe in God, they believe in God, they're religious or spiritual, or just from a psychological point of view, it really helps people get past the wording and really touch their hearts and sink into their hearts. And I really appreciate that about your book. So thank you for that. There's and there's a lot of people that need the 12 steps, like you said. And there's a huge movement right now. I don't know if you heard of it, the deprogramming movement.
No.
And
Mm-mm.
they're getting big, and they put down the 12 steps completely.
Mm.
And a lot of them, I think they experience religious trauma through the 12-step program, which I understand. And there's a
Right.
lot of stuff that I agree with what they're saying. Bill Wilson says our critics are our best benefactors.
Hmm.
And learning from people and why something didn't work or why you feel hurt. But I just feel resentment has taken over a lot of these people that I hear talking because they're
Right.
speaking out of resentment. And the
Mhm.
12 steps are beautiful. It's what every tradition
Right.
uses. They're coping skills that
Mhm.
create healthy habits and health, give us better health and a clearer perception,
Right.
and helps make better decisions in our life, so we suffer much less. And when we learn how to suffer, and we suffer much less because we know how to embrace our suffering and with
Mhm.
these coping skills.
Yeah. They were really powerful for me. They really helped me, which is why I want to be able to share them in a way that can be helpful to more people, people who are not or who are struggling with that religious point of reference.
Mm.
So
I
that,
remember.
go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. Go ahead.
No, I
No,
was
go
just
ahead.
going to
I'm
say
sorry.
about this group. I think people are entitled to believe what they believe, and they are entitled
Yeah.
to share that belief as long as they're not hurting other people. And that can be tricky, right? Because one of the things that people have said to me when I've shared the way that I view things that may be different than traditional AA program speak is that you better not share this with people because you could hurt someone, and you might make them relapse, or you might be the
Yeah.
cause of their relapse. And that's kind of heavy too, because it's, you know what, if somebody drinks, like, it's not going to be because of anything. Like, that's their responsibility. That's like putting that's so codependent. That's codependent language, right? Like, well, if somebody else does something, then it's going to be your fault. So I do believe that I do believe that you need to be responsible and careful, right? But that if it works for them, and they like, if it works for people and they're not drinking, right, and they're able to break these habits that are creating suffering for them, then, and this works, then more power to that.
Yeah.
I don't have to believe it, right? I don't have to agree per se, but it it's so much about, like, live and let live, right?
Yeah.
As long as you're not harming someone, then they should be able to express how they feel about AA, even if it's, that they don't like it and they don't agree with it.
You're right, and I admit that I almost fell into that category because I was hurt. But then I got back into gratitude, and I started to see how
Hmm.
people helped me, and
Right.
I look back at what everything I went through made me who I am today.
Right.
It all served a purpose, even the
Exactly.
dogma, the structure, the crazy
Hmm.
structure, and had to wearing suits. If I had to wear a suit when it was my sobriety birthday or when I'm speaking, and I don't do that stuff now, but it all served a purpose, whether I liked
Hmm.
it or not, and I gotta be grateful for that. So, and and the 12 steps, they're beautiful. If you can get past some of the wording that some people don't
Hmm.
agree with, like there's
Right.
certain things I don't agree with. Like the book says, selfish and self-centeredness we think is the root of our troubles. Well, it
Hmm.
says we think. For me, it's unresolved pain, trauma,
Hmm.
and stress is the
Hmm.
root of our troubles. And when we
Right.
can work with on that stuff, then we can heal and move
Yeah,
on. Do you
absolutely.
do you believe we can recover, fully
Yes,
recover?
absolutely. 100%. One of the biggest arguments I ever got into with a coworker when I worked at a treatment center was when I I don't know if it was during a group or I referred to being recovered, and he said in front of all of the clients, you'll never be recovered. None of you will ever be recovered. You're never going to be recovered. You will, you'll heal, or the way, however he put it, right? He's like, you'll heal, but you'll never be recovered. And I took him aside in another room and I said, I want you never to say that to another client ever again. I'm like, how do you think a client feels coming into treatment being told that they're never going to recover? Like, that is just insane, in my opinion. And he's like, well, the program tells you. And, he goes into the AA speak. And I'm like, I don't care what somebody said in the program that now everybody parrots as truth,
Yeah.
right? Because that's how it happens. Somebody says it, then somebody else parrots it, and it becomes truth. It becomes everybody's truth. It's like, well, whoever said? No, I don't remember reading that in the literature anywhere, that will never be recovered. As a matter of fact, it says we will be recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So who was the person that said you can never refer to yourself as recovered? Well, too bad. Like, I am recovered. And I will be recovered, in my opinion, as long as I don't re-engage in that harmful habit. But
Yeah.
th- that's, I'm at the point in and that's another thing. Don't ever say that you'll never drink again. And, you know, I would like to think that I would never drink again, because that seems so ridiculous based upon what I've learned about alcohol and what it does to the brain and how it impacted, and how my sober lifestyle has just transformed my life in ways that I can't even begin to describe. So for me to pick up and drink again would be an act of insanity to
Mm.
do that. But I can refer to myself however I choose. I can call myself, the recovered clown if I want to. And some people might be referring to me that way right now, but I don't care. Like, it it's about what that's not empowering to me, boo boo, right? That's not
No.
empowering to tell someone, you know, just remember you're never going to be recovered.
It's funny because the book promises transformation, awakening, and freedom. And that's quite the opposite. And like you said,
Mhm,
even on the faceplate, it talks about recovered in the very beginning of the book before you even dive
mhm,
into it. Yeah, I don't know why is it human beings are obviously attracted to the negativity part,
mhm.
not just in the 12-step community, but even in religion or anywhere else. We just get caught into like I don't know. It just seems human beings like to identify with the negative at times.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Well,
just
it's
crazy.
fear-based. I think that it really is a personality trait of there are a lot of people who are sober who are still living a very fear-based life, and a very negative, very much focused on the negative and the things that are wrong and worst case scenario. That's what I mean by addictive thinking. I
Yeah.
I work with people who have a serious problem with negative thought patterns, and the way that that's creating problems and pain and difficulty in their lives. And many of them don't have any substance use issues, but certainly I think by virtue of the way alcohol and drugs impact the brain, that there's no one I've ever met who has a substance use disorder that also does not have a thinking problem that goes along with that. And some people don't ever go beyond the not drinking or no longer using drugs to address those thinking patterns that are still problematic in
Mm.
their lives.
You got me thinking both, drug addicts or digital platforms,
Right.
that they're both called users, and it's
Mm.
both producing dopamine.
Right. It's the dopamine.
Yeah.
It is absolutely the dopamine.
Yeah, even the jaywalker story. what do you think he's after? He's after that dopamine hit,
Right.
even if it's dangerous.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. I am an alcoholic. I remember I contacted New York and I asked them about give me every information, anything where we got that custom from, and no one fully knows. They Henrietta was even asked where they got that custom from, and she didn't really fully know. So it may have came from the Oxford Group, the Drunk Squad, or it they believe it came from a 1940s something mid 40s documentary called "I Am an Alcoholic."
Hmm.
And it kind of became a custom, and it kind of everyone thought it was cool in the fellowship, and they kind of ran with it. But they said Bill never went up. Anytime he talked, he just started talking. He never said I'm an alcoholic. So that helped me out a lot. I used to say I'm a grateful member of blah blah blah.
Right.
Um, that was
And
more
yeah.
healthier for me.
Right.
Gratitude.
And that's the way it started. It started as nobody identified themselves as a or an. It was, I am a member of, I am a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So somewhere along the way, someone started that and it became then the way and the truth.
You're right. I always say the first thing the first language when I walked into the 12-step rooms wasn't English or Spanish. It was Victimese. My
Hmm.
question to you is, why do many of us that walk in that are suffering from addiction or substance use call automatically fall into the victim mentality?
Oh, I think the victim mentality happened way before they walked through the
Yeah,
doors,
yeah.
of a 12-step program. I think that it's, misery loves company and one victim talking to another victim, they're in their glory, of, oh, poor me and, all the horrible things. And I was one of them. I walked through the doors of AA as an absolute victim. And that's one thing for sure, like one of the biggest transformations for me through therapy was recognizing what a victim I had, like had lived my life as a victim for so long, and finally taking responsibility for myself was difficult at first, but then became very empowering to be able to take responsibility for myself, my thoughts, my feelings, my actions. And some people just don't want to. It's easier for them to not be responsible than it is.
Mm.
It's too difficult to make that change. And it is difficult. It's a difficult you really have to be honest with yourself and look at yourself in a way that most people are not willing to do. And that's something that's very true of hitting bottom, let's just say, right? Getting to the point where, because I tried to engage in AA a couple of times, and it wasn't until I was at a point in my drinking that I was willing to do anything. I just didn't want to feel this way anymore. I wanted to be able to stop. And so I was basically at a point where whatever you told me to do, if you told me to stand in a corner or stand on my head in the corner and that would help me stay sober, I was willing to do it.
Mm.
And I thank God for that, because a lot of people don't ever get to that point. But because they don't ever get to that point, they don't change and they remain victims. But I did, so that's where the gratitude comes in. Even though it was painful, it's true that pain is the touchstone to all spiritual growth. I am very grateful for all of the pain that I experienced, because I would not be who I am today. I would not have all the blessings that I have today had that not happened. So, yeah, the rooms of 12-step programs are full of victims, right? But how do you go from victim to becoming responsible for yourself? A part of that is the 12 steps, and for some people that's enough, but for others, like myself, I needed help. I needed more guidance.
Mm. What made you feel that anybody can use these 12 steps to make them more universal? I remember thinking like seeing, a lot of the police brutality at times, like, and you hear people going on different sides, police lives matter or whatever, people arguing against police, but I realize they're human beings just like everyone else. And they have a crazy job. Some came from traumatic backgrounds,
Right.
um, racist or prejudice,
Hmm.
maybe, whatever. They're just human beings. But when you put a badge, power, and fear and trauma along with that job, they need something
Hmm.
to help them because they're only a human being just like
Hmm.
ourselves. And I think the 12 steps, I remember thinking 12 steps would be great if they can work a 12-step program,
Hmm.
especially with the job they have to hold. Why do you feel other people could be, this can be beneficial to other people?
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize that this is only a tool, right?
Yeah.
It's a tool. This is not meant to be like you're going to, do this workbook and your life is going to be transformed because you did my workbook kind of a thing, right? It's a tool that can help people who are going through the steps either, as a high school student. That was really my thing, right? My my goal was a high school student could take this and they could apply it to something they're struggling with in their life and utilize it as a tool. It could also be a helpful tool for sponsors who are struggling with people who have difficulty with the God and the religious aspect of how they're viewing the 12 steps. It, so the why, I think the answer to the why question is really more about it being diverse, right? That
Yeah.
it just really addresses diversity of thought. And so that's why I think that it can be helpful, a helpful tool for people who are going through the 12 steps or have never gone through the 12 steps, have no interest in participating in a 12-step program, but they pick up this workbook and they're at home and they're doing it on their own and they come to some really important awarenesses for themselves. So it's not only the diversity within the book of the ways in which different ways in which you can view the steps, but it's also, I think, the diverse application of the book and who can benefit from it.
And I think I'll add to that. I think it's a very helpful tool for anybody that's a human being having this human experience.
Yeah.
It gives us better ways to cope with things and handle things and help, shift our perception. In one of your books, you added a Wayne Dyer quote for the family in recovery,
Hmm.
and that Wayne Dyer quote is what I learned in the fourth step. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change,
Right.
and that meant that changed everything for me once I learned how to change my perception,
Hmm.
question it for the first time
Hmm.
in my life.
Hmm.
Whoa, I'm the awareness behind the thoughts and the emotions. I'm not the thought and the emotion itself. And
Hmm.
I started to broaden my awareness as I continue to live these principles on a daily basis. As the years go by,
Yeah.
I no longer suffer from alcoholism anymore, but I do
Hmm.
suffer from assholism at times. And I have coping skills so I can get past that so I don't hurt
Right.
people. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I suffer from the same occasionally. We all do. It's a part of the human condition, right? We're all imperfect. The thing I want to add about that Wayne Dyer quote is I have thought about that relative to the doing part of it, right? So, yes, when I change the way that I think of things, when I change the way that I look at things, or the way that I view things, right, that those things that I look at change. But this is also true of when I change the way that I do things, right? Like when I change the way that I react to someone, it gives the opportunity for that interaction to change, right? So when I change the way that I do things, the the things that, my interactions change, right? So I use this with families, uh, emphasizing, when you change the way you respond to your loved one, right? That response can create change, right? When you change, because a lot of family members are looking at, well, they need to do all the changing, right? Like they need to stop drinking. They need to stop. And there are a lot of family members who are adding to the struggle, who are triggering, who are adding fuel to the fire, so to speak. And so the more that family members can start to look at themselves and say, okay, how can I respond differently? How can I approach this differently? Then there's possibility for change. When one person is willing to do something differently, then there's a possibility for change.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask you what kind of advice you would give a family that has a loved one suffering from addiction. Um, but you kind of already touched
I
on it
would say
with,
look at self, right? What can you
right.
be? And that's, let me tell you, boo boo, when I introduce that to people, I get a lot of resistance, right? They're like, what are you talking about? I don't need to change. I don't need to do anything differently. And that's just not true, because the truth is that the whole family system has become dysfunctional as a result of sometimes as a result of the addiction, but sometimes the family was dysfunctional before the addiction even started, right? So the more that family members can look at self, and I tell this to couples that I work with, don't come into couples therapy thinking about all the things that your partner needs to do to change, because that's not going to work. The only way it's going to work if you come into couples therapy and you look at the way that you can change and what you can do differently. And that's true for any family members who have a loved one who's struggling with addiction. How can you change? What can you do differently that can produce potentially some sort of a change?
I love that. It's kind of like the sex ideal and the four step. Okay, write a sex ideal. Okay, now you be that.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah. And the one thing I want to mention about the ninth step is that, and this is, I'll have family members come to me and they'll say to me, and like I said before, I have to look this stuff up, or I cannot. This is why I can't tell jokes or stories, boo boo, because I can never remember like how to nothing. It's terrible. It's not as bad as when I was first getting sober, though. I would read the big book when I was first getting sober, read one paragraph, and it would be gone. And I'm like, what? What did I just read? So the ninth step is made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. No, it's if it would injure them, others, or me. If it would injure
Yeah.
me, it would, if it's going to. So some family members will say to me, my loved one never made their amends to me. They never did. Well, maybe one of the reasons they didn't make a direct amends to you is because if they did so, it would open them up for potential further pain and suffering, right? Because then that would provide, because there are some family members who shame their loved ones, who are treat them terribly. They don't think so, but they do. And so there are some people who, are recovering, where I'll say, if this is going to, and this is not a way of like getting out of it. It's not a way of, well, I'm not going to make any amends because it's going to pain me to do so. No, that's not what that means. It means that if it's going to potentially harm you seriously, right? Whether that's mentally, emotionally, or physically, then do something else. Put something else into the universe that's positive relative to that person, right? Like do something that's spiritually meant for them, whether that's putting something positive back into the relationship. So I want to make that clear. I don't know if you will have any family members or anyone like that listening, but this idea of, well, my loved one never made an amends to me. How do you know that? Like, you don't know that they didn't make an amends to you, per se. They may have, and you just don't realize it. Them staying sober is an amends to you, by the way. right? So,
I appreciate that. In one of your books, you wrote about recovery myths. Do you believe this is a disease?
mm, I do believe that it's a disease of the mind and potentially body because it changes the way you view the world. And it's also progressive. So there's a great video. Um, what is it called? I'm telling you, boo boo, especially now that I'm
No problem.
61, my memory is shot. It is shot. Pleasure Unwoven. Thank you, God. Pleasure Unwoven is the name and of the movie, and it's uh it's a video that is conducted by Kevin Kevin McCauley. Is that he's a doctor, and it talks about why substance use disorders are a disease. And he does an excellent job. I recommend it for anyone, especially family members, to watch. And so, yes, answer to your question is yes, I do believe that it's a disease because it's a disease that affects the mind in particular.
Yeah, I think he's out of Utah, right?
Yes.
Think, yeah, I heard
Yeah.
of him.
hmm I
Yeah,
think
thank
so.
you.
You're welcome.
Um, is there a difference for you between spirituality and religion, or is
Oh,
it all the same?
oh my God. Absolutely. 100%. Spirituality is the more overarching concept, right? So you can be religious and be spiritual, right?
Mm.
Religion is more or less the way that people choose to practice their spirituality. But there are plenty of people out there who are also religious who are not at all spiritual people, right? So when I'm talking spirituality, I mean more along the lines of like the map of consciousness, right? The characteristics that you embody and that you practice, and you practice love and kindness and compassion and forgiveness and all of those parts of ourselves, right? That create strength within the body. Those are spiritual characteristics. But I think the easiest way to understand spirituality is based upon the three-prong approach. If you can think of it like, I think it's in the Seed of the Soul where he talks about how, I forget the author, he talks about how within each of us we have this seat and that people refer to it as soul, essence, true self. I mean, there are a lot of different words, right, that you can use to describe this this aspect of self consciousness that exists within all human beings. And there are three things that support that stool. One being, what do you believe?
Mm.
What do you believe? Do you believe in God? Do you believe there's no God? Do you believe in the universe? Do you believe in science? Do you believe a little of this? Do you believe a little of that? It all starts with what do you believe? In my opinion, you have a right, boo boo, to believe whatever you believe, right? Just like I have a right to believe whatever I believe. And then number two is how do you practice your spirituality? And that could be through religious practice, joining a religious organization. I myself am not a part of, even though I appreciate and I enjoy going to church from time to time, I don't belong to a religious group and I don't practice my spirituality that way. I practice through prayer. I practice through meditation. I practice through being kind and compassionate and building the strength within me to be a loving person. That's how I practice. I practice through writing and contributing positive literature to the world. People practice through creating music and things like that, right? Those are all ways that you practice your spirituality. And then there are spiritual experiences. And the
Mm.
interesting thing about spiritual experiences, and I've had my own, which is something that really, it's different for different people. Like people have spiritual experience, that sort of aha, like where you sort of have that experience of recognizing and having an awareness in that moment of something greater than yourself, right? Even if it's a connection to yourself in that moment, right? Really feeling connected within yourself. And yet, spiritual experiences can change what we believe, right? So let's say, our conditioning plays a big part of it, boo boo. If you grow up in a
Yeah.
family where your dad's a pastor and you're being taught to believe XYZ, the likelihood of you believing XYZ is greater than if you don't grow up in that type of environment, right? So a lot of times people believe what they believe because they were told to believe that
Mhm.
and they didn't question it, which is we get into like the four agreements and the fifth agreement in particular with that one, right? But let's say you have an experience like a near death experience and you never believed in God, but you had this moment and this experience where had this connection and that changed the way you believe, what you believe, and also then changed the way you practice, right?
Mhm.
But it could work in the opposite. People that you love are killed. Oh, God has betrayed me and, all these bad things have happened to me, so I don't believe in God anymore because, people were taken away from me and I don't now go to church. I'm just using these as examples. I'm not saying me, right, per se, right? But spirituality, yes, is that overarching. I believe we are all, I had this debate with my son because my son was an atheist for a long time, right? My youngest son, he was an atheist. And he was like, I'm not spiritual, mom. I'm like, by definition, you're a human being. You are spiritual. You are a spiritual being. And he was like, no, I'm not. No. So then finally we had this discussion and I explained to him about spiritual characteristics and they exist within all of us, right? We have the capacity for good and evil, right? Within all of us. It's all about what we choose to cultivate. And so you are a spiritual being. And he's
Mhm.
finally agreed with me now that he is spiritual. He's just not, of course, religious. So I hope that thoroughly answered your
Oh
question.
yeah, thank you.
You're
I have a
welcome.
couple more quick questions.
Sure.
Abstinence versus sobriety. Is there a difference?
Yeah, sure. Well, I don't know that there's a difference between abstinence and sobriety, but I do believe there's a difference between abstinence and emotional, like mental and emotional. There's physical sobriety and then there's mental and emotional sobriety. And there are plenty of people who are physically sober. Physically,
Mhm.
they're sober. They're no longer consuming alcohol or taking drugs. That doesn't mean they are mentally or emotionally sober. There are plenty of people out there who, again, don't drink alcohol or take drugs, but they don't have any emotional intelligence, right? Um, because of the environment that they grew up in, they were not taught skills on how you validate feelings and that feelings there are no feelings that are right or wrong or good or bad, right? All feelings are valid feelings. It's not the feeling. We all have a right to our feelings. We're entitled to feel the way we feel. It's what we do in response to those feelings that can become problematic, right? So no, I yes, yes, I agree that there is a difference between abstinence and mental and emotional sobriety. I like to think of it more in terms of physical, mental, and emotional sobriety.
Mhm. I love that. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you have any last words for or anything you would like to add on to this discussion?
Um, just that I'm really grateful for you asking me to be a part of your podcast.
No problem. How do we find you?
How do we find me? I have my YouTube channel, Fostering Resilience. So that is something that I do on a regular basis. I'm always trying to contribute to the world That's something that's very important to me, is contributing to the world in a way that puts something positive back into the world. I have such a, a sense of gratitude for not just my own sobriety, but especially my son's recovery, that I'm committed to just doing what I can for the entirety of my life to give back and to contribute what I can to help other people to heal and to recover. So I think probably if there's one thing that I want to emphasize and share as sort of a closing for all of this, it's that you can recover. Recovery is possible, because I think that there are plenty of people who are at the point as we speak right now who have lost any sense of hope that things are going to get better. And I was one of them. I was not only a person who had lost a sense of hope for myself and my own recovery, but I had especially lost any hope for the recovery of my loved one. And here I am 17 years later, and my life is better than I could have ever imagined. My son is doing better than he's ever done. He's sober, he's happy, he's healthy. And so miracles do happen. Like miracles happen every day. That just because you're feeling the way that you're feeling, hopeless, in despair, does not mean that recovery is not possible, and that you just need to take action, right? And reach out and ask someone for help.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you coming on. Especially like I love the acronym for HOPE, help other people evolve. And through your work, your channel, and everything you do, you're doing that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm gonna end it with some words from one of your books.
Okay.
Remember, your healing ripples outward. Every time you make a conscious choice, take responsibility, extend compassion, or share your story, you light the way for someone else. This is the sacred legacy of this work. You are now part of a larger tapestry of healing truth and human resilience. So keep up, keep growing, keep returning, keep offering your light. The steps live in you now. And whatever life leads next, you are ready. Thank you for your books and your work. I appreciate you coming on. Namaste.
Thank you for having me. Namaste.
Just know we out here. Know we out here working in a major way. Had to speak on it just to make a break. Any given subject, know we make a way. Time to level up on a day-to-day. Know we out here working for the greater good. Expand your mind, broaden your lens the way you should. From the stars to the galaxy to speak on spirituality. Higher understanding for the neighborhood.